Welcome back inside the den. I'm Jared Vasquez, joined by Chris Murray. We're continuing our position preview of the Nevada football team. Today, talking offensive line and interior defensive line, important positions. Obviously, we're gonna kick it off with the Union. Chris, how you doing? Just give us a preview. Obviously, the Union hasn't been at full strength for quite some time now, but this should be a more promising unit than years past, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with the offensive line to me is that the position coach for that offensive line has been kind of spun like a roulette wheel in Las Vegas. Like every single year, it's a new position coach.
Yeah.
You're talking about like 11 different offensive line coaches since 2009. And how are you supposed to build continuity when you have that turnover? Not in terms of only just coaching technique, but also the scheme that offensive line coach brings. I mean, that group has to gel and be fully in continuity as 5 members playing as one to be successful. So that's been a really big issue. Brian Armstrong does come over from Fresno State. Before that, he was at Montana State with Jeff Choate. He was the offensive coordinator for a year and then also offensive line coach. So he's a really good coach. And I think he's got some decent pieces to work with. I think Isaiah World at left tackle could be an all-conference player. It's his 3rd year as a starter. He's kind of a young player. He played basketball mostly growing up in San Diego. Andrew Madrigal, 3rd-year starter at center, a very smart kid. He's an engineering major. So those 2 positions, which are the most 2 important on the line, are pretty well taken care of. And then you got a couple of young guys, Tyson Ruffins and then Josiah Timatoa. Both of those guys started last year as true freshmen, but they didn't go over the 4-game limit. They were held out of the season finale, so they wouldn't go over that. So they're still technically redshirt freshmen. So I think those 4 players is pretty solid. They did bring in 3 transfers from power conference levels. Spencer Lavelle in particular has played at Kansas, Arizona State, Cal. So I think you add all that together, and there's some pretty good experience here. There's somewhat of continuity because to me, the 4 starters that I mentioned between Ruffins, World, Madrigal, and Timatoa all did play together at some point last year. So, I think there's reason to be optimistic about how this offensive line can perform. And I think it's going to help that, Jeff Choate wants to come in here and run the ball. And I think it's a lot easier to run block than it is to pass protect for 40 times a game. So I think, that DNA and that mentality is going to help this line because you talk to offensive linemen, probably 95% of them will tell you they'd rather run block than pass protect. So I think all that added together, you could see a pretty solid Union this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it starts obviously with the left tackle, Isaiah World, 3rd year starting, correct? But kind of has the physical tools, 6'8", tall guy, long arms. Kind of was susceptible when he first started out under Ken Wilson in 2022 to getting beat around the edge with speed, but. Kind of probably going to end up finding his footing, so to speak, this year, and really has the traits. We'll see if Armstrong gets the best out of him and turns him into what could be an all-conference type tackle, just based on his stature and pedigree alone. But that's great for a left tackle. But like you mentioned, continuity is everything with the offensive line. If you're continually trying to plug in new pieces every year in, year out, then you're going to struggle because really it's 5 guys acting as one. In any type of like zone blocking scheme or any passing blocking scheme. Just really, your movement needs to be dictated on like just being understanding how your person to your right or left passes off a run block, passes off a pass block. So having those guys like, World, Madrigal, and then, throwing in those freshmen that started 3 games last year, it's going to be big for them. But like you said, it's going to be mainly running and which offensive linemen, quite frankly, really like because it's better than trying to, stop a person going full force at you and in turn go full force at the defensive line, attack them. So we could see a resurgence in the Union, but it really starts with the guys up front. And, I think there's some promising guys up there and obviously some young guys. Getting Tyler Miller out of Galena is a good get. Now, obviously, it's more of a project for down the line. But, everything starts with the offensive line. So promising unit.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be a good group if Nevada is going to be successful this year. I think if Nevada is going to overachieve, like the win totals anywhere from 2 to 3 on the betting lines, it's going to be because they develop a really good rushing attack. They get 200 yards per game. They get 5 yards per carry. You only do that if your offensive line is setting the tempo. Jeff Choate has said that he has turned over this team to the offensive line in terms of wanting them to be the leaders, wanting them to be the spark. He's said that you can only be good if your offensive line is good. So certainly he's putting a lot of responsibility on those guys, and we'll see if they can step up and perform. Obviously, maybe not the deepest group that you would want, but I do think last year's experience will help them. So, last year they lost Grant Stark to Oregon State. They lost Aaron Frost to Arizona State. If they have those two guys, it's probably a pretty good offensive line. Both those guys are starting in the Pac-12. Without them, that did push those freshmen into more playing time. So they'll be more prepared for this upcoming season, and we'll see how they end up doing. But, you could say quarterback is the most important position on the field, but I always say it's offensive line. That's why Chris Alt's teams are always really, really good. He always had 2 to 3 all-conference offensive linemen. And since he has resigned in 2012, Nevada's only had 2 or 3 all-conference offensive linemen over its last, 12 years. Obviously, you had Joel Bitonio, you had Austin Corbett. Now they're in the NFL, but you can't be a one-man line. One person can only do so much on the line. So, I think there's, like I said, there's reason to think that this line could be one of the better ones we've seen for Nevada over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, offensive lines dictate success in the Mountain West. And you look at past winners of the conference. You think of Air Force, right? Just what that.
Well, Air Force has never won the Mountain West.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, not.
They've had success.
Their success at the in the Mountain West is dictated off their offensive line, just because they run the triple option and they blow people off the line. And you look at past winners like Boise State, for example, always getting talent on the line and being able to run block and spring lanes open for players like Genty and the talented running back room out there in Boise. So really, just it starts with the guys up front, and this could be a unit that can lead to potentially Dollars, Hayes, or Garbo to potentially break that 1,000 yards if they're really not going to go committee by committee and do a one back approach. But yeah, it works in tandem, and Nevada could potentially get away from those 2-3 wins, like you said, if these guys get some separation up front.
Yeah, I mean, you do look at the history of winning Mountain West titles, and they usually run first teams. I mean, Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State. The year San Jose State won in 2020, their offensive and defensive lines were way better than Nevada's offensive and defensive lines, and that's why they won that game late in the 2020 season down in Las Vegas to put San Jose State in the Mountain West title game and to keep Nevada from getting into that title game. So, that's where you win championships is the offensive and defensive lines. Nevada's not been quite good enough there in recent years, even though they've had some really talented skill position players. I probably have more faith in Nevada's offensive line than defensive line this year, though. So if we flip it over to the defensive side of the ball on the interior, there are a lot more question marks and a lot less proven, quality there than what we're looking on at the offensive line.
Yeah, Jeff Choate told us in the spring, we asked him about the defensive tackle position. He's like, quite frankly, there's no depth, no real presence there. Obviously, he didn't mean any ill will with that comment. It's just the reality was that they really didn't have much players at the position. I'm sure they made their efforts to in the transfer portal to bring in guys. But if you look at the interior defensive line, a name that pops out is Thomas Whitty. A guy that gives you some pass rush and some rush defense capability. But outside that, thinking about defensive line, interior defensive line, it's really been absent since Don Peterson kind of graduated. So, yeah, tell us a little more about the interior defensive line.
Well, yeah, Whitty will probably start. He started all the games last year. He's a former walk-on, about 270 pounds, so a little bit undersized. And then if I had to pick another starter, it'd probably be Nelson Rapati. He's a transfer from City College of San Francisco, and they're pretty high on him. He had a pretty good spring camp, but to me, Nevada lost his 2 best interior defensive linemen. James Hansen, who was a captain, transferred to Texas Tech, and Deion Washington, who was a really talented player, maybe didn't get to all that talent, and Nevada went to Hawaii. So you lost your 2 best players in that interior defensive line, and they've got some really good true freshmen coming in, and 4 or 5 guys who are, pretty accoladed and pretty solid players, but you don't really want to be playing true freshmen at interior defensive line. So I think if they can keep this core together moving forward, I think it can be solid. But along with wide receiver, defensive tackle is the biggest question mark on this team. If you can't stop the run, your defense is going to be really, really rough. So, yeah, there's going to have to be some surprises in there, but probably Whitty and Rapati, they did get a transfer from Bowling Green after spring camp, so maybe he comes in and gives them some quality reps. But, yeah, it's certainly not a lot of, like, playmaker guys, but, you know, Nevada's probably hoping they can at least kind of hold the fort, soak up some tackles, keep the line of scrimmage from backing up too much, because there are some really talented middle linebackers on this team if Nevada's defensive line can keep the offensive line off those guys.
Yeah, so we'll see. Just kind of wrapping up our mini episode of this player preview. The offensive line, promise. The interior defensive line is a question mark heading into the 2024 season. You'd see it going bad at week 0 against SMU if they come in with a rushing attack.
Yeah, SMU is a fully built program. They're coming off 11 wins. They might be a preseason top 25 team. They're number 25 in ESPN's Football Power Index. They're moving to the ACC. They got a lot more money for NIL. That's why they moved into the ACC, because the donor said, we'll carry you in there. So that first game will be interesting to see if they can hold up to the physicality. I think that first game will be interesting just in general, because this is a team that probably doesn't have a lot of confidence, 4-20 the last 2 years. So if you go out in your season opener at home and you do get a solid crowd, they're going to try and get 25,000 people and you lose by 30 points. What does that do to your confidence? It can't be high to start the season. So it's kind of a risky game. Now, on the inverse, if you go out there and you play it within single digits, kind of like Nevada did against Kansas last year, maybe you start to believe, okay, this is a new era. Yeah, we didn't win the game, but we just played maybe a preseason top 25 team and we were competitive with them. As the schedule lightens up, maybe we can win some of these games. So that'll be a very interesting litmus test right out of the gates. A lot of times you open with an FCS school. There are 3 Mountain West schools playing on week 0. 2 of them are playing FCS schools. Nevada's maybe playing a top 25 school. So a little bit different scheduling formula there for the Wolfpack.
Yeah, and Cho just said at the Mountain West Media Days, like, they're going to have a big spotlight on them, because in that week 0, like that window, Notre Dame plays in the morning, but they play in the evening. So really they're going to be the kind of only show in the nation, so to speak. Obviously, if SMU is top 25, then that draws even more of a market, Yeah. So we'll see. It'd be an exciting opportunity, but yeah, that's our preview of the offensive and interior defensive lines. We'll be back tomorrow with a preview of edge rushers and linebackers, a promising unit, both on the edge and with linebackers that have proven to be successful at the Mountain West level. So thanks for joining us inside the den. We'll be back next time.